I moved into the inherited mansion, I didn't take the gardener's warning. Don't go outside after sunset. At midnight, when I looked out the window, I saw something moving in the garden. I grabbed a lantern and went outside, but they vanished instantly. As I stepped back into the house, I heard creaking noises coming from the upstairs floor. The mansion wasn't what I'd expected when my attorney called about an inheritance from a great uncle I barely remembered. I'd pictured a modest cottage, not the sprawling Victorian mansion that greeted me at the end of the tree-lined drive, its stone facade weathered but imposing against the dense woods surrounding it. The place has been vacant for nearly a decade, my attorney had explained. Your great uncle was eccentric, lived alone except for a groundskeeper who maintained the estate. That groundskeeper, Morton, was waiting when I arrived. He was older than I expected, perhaps in his 70s, with a weathered face and gnarled hands. His expression remained neutral as he handed me the keys, but his eyes held something I couldn't quite read. "The house is yours now," he said, his voice gravelly. "I'll continue tending the grounds, as I promised your uncle." As I thanked him, he hesitated, then added, "One piece of advice, if you'll take it, don't go into the garden after sundown, for your own safety." I smiled politely, assuming it was some old superstition. "Worried about me tripping in the dark?" Morton didn't return my smile. "The grounds aren't safe at night. There are things that come out after sunset. They were here long before your family built this house, and they'll be here long after we're all gone." Before I could ask him to elaborate, he turned and walked away, disappearing down a path that led to a small cottage at the edge of the property. The first few days passed uneventfully as I settled in. The house was beautiful, if outdated, high ceilings, ornate woodwork, and furniture draped in white sheets. I spent my days exploring the many rooms and sorting through my great-uncle's belongings. The garden, however, was what truly captivated me. It was extensive and meticulously maintained, with stone pathways winding through flower beds, ancient oak trees, and sculpted hedges. A large fountain stood at its center, though no water flowed from it now. Despite Morton's warning, I found myself drawn to the garden, spending hours there each day. I didn't take his advice seriously until my 5th night at the mansion. I'd been working late in my great-uncle's study, organizing papers. Around midnight, I glanced out the window and noticed something unusual. A soft, bluish glow emanating from the garden fountain. Curious, I moved closer to the window. The full moon illuminated the garden in silver light, casting long shadows across the lawn. And there, moving between the hedges and flower beds, were shapes. Human-sized, but not quite human in their movements. Too fluid, too quick. They seemed to glide rather than walk, leaving the foliage undisturbed as they passed. I counted at least 7 distinct figures, all converging toward the fountain where the blue light pulsed stronger now. I couldn't make out details from this distance, just silhouettes against the moonlit garden. Forgetting Morton's warning, I grabbed a flashlight from the desk drawer and headed downstairs. My rational mind suggested neighborhood kids trespassing, or perhaps some light trick caused by the moonlight. The night air was unusually cold as I stepped onto the back terrace. The stone was icy beneath my feet, and my breath clouded in front of me. I switched on the flashlight and directed its beam toward the fountain. The figures vanished the moment the light touched the garden, not running away or hiding, but simply gone, as if they'd never been there at all. The blue glow at the fountain disappeared too, leaving only mundane stonework. I advanced cautiously down the terrace steps onto the garden path, sweeping my flashlight back and forth. Nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints marked the damp soil beside the path, The only sound was the distant hooting of an owl. "Hello?" I called out, feeling slightly foolish. "Is anyone there?" My voice sounded muffled, as if the air itself was absorbing the sound. I walked further into the garden toward the fountain. The stone basin was dry, covered in a fine layer of moss that showed no signs of recent disturbance. I was about to dismiss the whole thing when I noticed something carved into the fountain's base. Symbols I didn't recognize, arranged in a circular pattern. They seemed older than the fountain itself, as if the structure had been built around this more ancient carving. As I leaned closer to examine the symbols, the temperature dropped suddenly. Frost began forming on the stone path, spreading outward from the fountain in a crystalline wave. The flashlight flickered, its beam weakening. A sense of overwhelming dread washed over me. I backed away from the fountain, then turned and ran toward the house, not looking back. I slammed the terrace door behind me, my hands shaking as I turned the lock. Through the glass panels, the garden appeared normal again, peaceful, still, bathed in moonlight. No frost, no strange lights, no moving figures. Had I imagined it all? Then I heard it, a soft thump from upstairs, followed by what sounded like footsteps. My heart, already racing, seemed to stop momentarily. I was supposed to be alone in the house. "Hello?" I called out, hoping for a response that would make sense. Perhaps Morton had come to check on me. But the house remained silent. I considered my options. I could leave. My car was parked out front. But something kept me rooted in place, a strange compulsion to understand what was happening. The footsteps upstairs continued, moving from room to room. I grabbed a fireplace poker and slowly made my way up the grand staircase, flashlight held out before me. The second-floor hallway was empty, but a door at the far end, leading to a bedroom I hadn't yet explored, stood ajar, though I was certain it had been closed earlier. As I approached, the sound stopped. I pushed the door open slowly. The room beyond was a child's bedroom, preserved as if frozen in time. A four-poster bed with faded blue curtains, shelves lined with old toys and books, a rocking horse in the corner, gently swaying as if recently disturbed. And on the bed, arranged in a neat row, were photographs I recognized from my great-uncle's study, family photos spanning generations. But something was wrong with them. In each photo, the faces had been scratched out, leaving only blank ovals where features should have been. I backed out of the room, my skin crawling. As I turned to leave, I noticed wetness on the hardwood floor, small puddles leading to another door further down the hall. I followed the trail to the master bedroom. The door was locked, but as I stood there, I heard a child's laugh from inside, high and clear, followed by hushing sounds. "Who's in there?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence, then a voice, so close it could have been whispering directly into my ear. "We've been waiting for you to join us in the garden. We need you to complete the circle." I jerked away from the door. The voice had been neither male nor female, child nor adult. Somehow all of these at once layered together in impossible harmony. I ran downstairs to the front door, desperate to escape, but when I tried the handle, it wouldn't turn. The door was locked, though I hadn't locked it myself. The same was true of every door leading outside. As I stood in the entrance hall, my phone rang. The sound was so normal, so out of place in the midst of the strangeness, that I answered without checking who was calling. "You should have listened to Morton," said a voice I didn't recognize. "The garden folk don't like being seen, and now they've noticed you." "Who is this?" I demanded. "What's happening here?" "Look at the photographs. Look at all the faces missing. Every person who's lived in that house and ignored the warning. They're all in the garden now, beneath the fountain, part of the circle." The line went dead, and upstairs, the footsteps began again, running toward the stairs. I fled to the study and barricaded the door. Outside, the first light of dawn was breaking. As sunlight filtered through the windows, the sounds in the house gradually faded away. When I finally ventured out hours later, the house was empty. All the doors were unlocked. In the driveway, Morton was tending to a flower bed as if nothing unusual had happened. "You went into the garden last night," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to speak. "They've seen you now," he said, his expression grim. "They'll be waiting for you tonight, and every night until they get what they want." "What do they want?" I managed to ask. Morton looked toward the garden, his eyes distant. "Same thing they've wanted since before this house was built. New faces for their collection, new souls for the circle." He turned back to me. "You have until sunset to leave town. After that, I can't help you." I packed my bags within the hour and drove away from the estate, never looking back. By the time I realized I had wandered off the trail during my hike, it was already getting dark. Deep in the forest, I spotted a light and walked toward it, hoping for help. The cabin I found looked abandoned, but inside there was still a warm kettle. On the wall, the calendar had today's date marked in red. I should have turned back when I first noticed the trail markers had stopped appearing. The forest was notorious for how quickly hikers could get lost among its ancient pines and dense undergrowth. But the light had been perfect for photography. Shafts of late afternoon sun cutting through the canopy, illuminating the forest floor in patches of gold. Just one more shot, I kept telling myself. Just one more. By the time I admitted I was lost, the sun was already dipping below the tree line. My phone showed no signal, and the GPS app had stopped updating my location an hour earlier. The battery was at 12%, not enough to use as a flashlight for long. Panic began to rise in my chest as shadows lengthened around me. October nights in these mountains were cold, and I wasn't equipped for an overnight stay in the wilderness. I had water and a few energy bars, but no shelter, no warm clothing beyond my light jacket. That's when I saw it. A faint glow between the trees, maybe half a mile away. A warm yellow light that could only be man-made. Relief washed over me. Someone else was out here, someone who might help me find my way back to the trailhead. I moved toward the light, stumbling over roots and rocks in my haste. As I got closer, the source became clear. A small cabin nestled in a clearing. It was an old structure, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney from which thin wisps of smoke rose into the darkening sky. The cabin looked like it had stood there for decades, perhaps even a century. Moss grew on the north side of the roof, and the small porch sagged slightly under the weight of time. But light glowed warmly from the windows, promising safety. I approached cautiously, suddenly aware that deep in these woods, people might not welcome strangers. I called out before reaching the porch. "Hello? Is anyone there? I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm lost." No response came from inside, though the light remained steady. I stepped onto the porch, wincing at the creak of old wood beneath my feet. Through the window, I could see a simple interior. A wooden table, a couple of chairs, a stone fireplace with embers glowing, and a small bed in the corner. But no people. I knocked on the door. "Hello? I don't mean to intrude." Still no answer. I tried the handle, surprised when it turned easily. The door swung open with a long, low groan. "I'm coming in," I announced, feeling awkward but desperate. "I'm lost and need help. I'll leave at first light." The cabin was warmer than I expected, the air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and something else, herbs perhaps, or tea. A cast iron kettle sat on a small wood stove in the corner, steam rising gently from its spout. Someone had been here very recently. "Hello?" I called again, but my voice sounded flat in the small space, as if the walls themselves absorbed the sound. I moved further inside, noticing more details. The cabin was sparse but tidy. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams. Shelves held mason jars filled with various dried plants, roots, and powders, all neatly labeled. A hunting rifle leaned in one corner, looking well used but clean. On the table sat an open notebook beside an oil lamp. The pages were covered in elegant handwriting, with strange symbols drawn in the margins. Circles containing intricate patterns of lines and dots that reminded me of astronomical charts. Curiosity drew me to the table. The ink on the open page looked fresh, not yet fully dried. The entry was dated with today's date. "They will come again tonight, as they have for the past 27 years on this date. The barrier thins. The sacrifice must be made. I cannot be the one this time. I have given too much already. But the forest provides. It always provides what is needed." A chill ran down my spine despite the cabin's warmth. I looked up and noticed for the first time a calendar hanging on the wall. It was a simple handmade affair, a piece of paper with the month and days written out. Today's date was circled in what looked like dried blood. Beneath the calendar hung a series of photographs, old yellowed images of people standing in front of this very cabin. The earliest looked to be from the early 1900s, a stern-faced man with a beard holding a rifle similar to the one in the corner. The next showed a woman from perhaps the 1940s, then another man from the 1970s, and on through the decades. The final photo showed an elderly woman, her eyes sharp and knowing. What struck me was the similarity in their expressions. All had the same resolute, almost resigned look, and all wore the same pendant around their necks, a circular amulet that matched the strange symbols in the notebook. The kettle on the stove whistled softly, making me jump. It hadn't been boiling a moment ago, I was certain of it. Moving to the stove, I noticed a cup had been set out, with a tea bag already placed inside. Beside it lay a note. "Drink. You'll need your strength." I backed away from the stove, my unease growing by the second. Someone had prepared for a visitor, or for me specifically, which seemed impossible. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, but the cabin was still empty. The door remained open as I'd left it, showing the clearing now bathed in twilight. I should leave, I thought, find my way back to the trail or at least away from here. But as I moved toward the door, it swung shut with a decisive thud. I ran to it, tugging at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "This isn't funny," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just need directions back to the trailhead." From outside came a sound that froze the blood in my veins, a low, rhythmic chanting in a language I didn't recognize. Multiple voices moving around the cabin in a circle. I rushed to the window, but could see nothing beyond my own reflection. The glass showed only darkness outside, as if the clearing, the forest, the world itself had vanished. The chanting grew louder. I tried another window, then another, but all showed the same impossible darkness. I was trapped. The kettle's whistle rose to a shriek, then stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I heard a voice right outside the door. "We welcome you, traveler. You who have come to us on the sacred night. The forest has provided as it always does." "What do you want?" I shouted, pressing my back against the wall furthest from the door. "Want? We need nothing from you but what you've already brought, your presence, your life force, your place in the circle." The door began to open slowly. In the doorway stood the elderly woman from the most recent photograph, Up close, I could see how frail she was, how her skin seemed almost translucent in the lamplight. Around her neck hung the circular pendant, glowing faintly with an inner light. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and regret. "But better you than another of us. We've all served our time." Behind her, I could now see others, figures in dark clothing, their faces obscured by shadow except for their eyes, which reflected the lamplight like those of animals caught in headlights. "You can't just keep me here," I said, looking desperately for a weapon, an escape route, anything. Helena smiled sadly. "The cabin has chosen you. The tea was prepared, the date was marked. This is how it has always been." She removed the pendant from around her neck. "You'll wear this now. You'll learn the ways. You'll keep the boundary strong. And in time, the forest will provide another to take your place. And if I refuse?" The figures behind her shifted, drawing closer to the doorway. Their chanting resumed, louder now, more insistent. "Then what comes through when the barrier falls will take us all," Helena said simply, "and it will not be as merciful as we are being." She stepped into the cabin, holding out the pendant. Behind her, I could see that the darkness beyond the doorway wasn't natural night. It was something deeper, more absolute, a void that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And within that darkness, something was moving, something large with too many limbs, pushing against what seemed like an invisible membrane that grew thinner by the second. "Choose quickly," Helena urged, her eyes darting to the darkness. "The barrier weakens." With shaking hands, I took the pendant from her. The moment it touched my skin, the symbols in the notebook began to glow with the same light as the amulet. The chanting outside reached a crescendo, then stopped. Helena sighed with visible relief. "It is done. You are the keeper now." She turned and walked through the doorway, the other figures parting to let her pass. One by one, they followed her, disappearing into the forest that had somehow returned outside the cabin. The door swung shut, leaving me alone. The pendant felt warm against my skin, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. The notebook on the table had turned to a fresh page, the date already written at the top in what I recognized with horror as my own handwriting. I rushed to the door, but it was locked again. This time from outside. Through the window, I could see the figures retreating into the trees, carrying lanterns that winked out one by one. "Learn quickly." Helena's voice seemed to whisper directly into my mind. "You have 1 year before you must begin preparing for the next keeper." I sank to the floor, the pendant heavy around my neck. On the wall, the calendar seemed to shimmer, the bloody circle around today's date fading as I watched. Above it, a new photograph had appeared alongside the others. It showed me, standing on the porch of the cabin, looking directly at the camera with the same resigned expression as all the others. The old film projector and reels I bought at the estate sale were supposed to be a perfect addition to my collection, but when I watched the first film, I realized it was much more than just a family video. Each night I played a reel, and every morning a new door appeared in my house, all of them locked until the final reel. I've always been drawn to vintage technology, the mechanical precision of devices built before planned obsolescence became the norm. My apartment was already filled with refurbished typewriters, vinyl record players, and antique cameras, so when I spotted the 16mm projector at the estate auction, it felt like fate. The elderly auctioneer described it as a Bell & Howell Filmo from the late 1940s in working condition with 7 unmarked film reels included. Most bidders showed little interest in the bulky, outdated equipment, but I raised my paddle immediately. I won it for a pittance. The previous owner had been a reclusive local man named Ethan who died without heirs. His belongings were being sold to cover outstanding debts. I'd never met him, but the auctioneer mentioned he'd been an amateur filmmaker many decades ago. That evening, I set up the projector in my living room, drawing the curtains and clearing a white wall to serve as a screen. The machine was in remarkable condition. Someone had taken meticulous care of it. After threading the first unlabeled reel through the gate, I dimmed the lights and started the projector. The familiar click-clack rhythm filled the room as the film began to roll. Black and white footage flickered to life on my wall, showing what appeared to be home movies from the 1950s. A smiling family having a picnic in a park I didn't recognize. Mother, father, 2 children, a dog. Normal, mundane scenes of everyday life. I was slightly disappointed. I'd hoped for something more artistic given the care taken with the equipment. But as I continued watching, something about the footage began to feel off. The family never acknowledged the camera, not once. In home movies, people typically wave or perform for the camera, but this family went about their activities as if unaware they were being filmed. More unsettling was the camera work itself, steady, patient, almost predatory in how it followed them from a distance. When the film ended, I felt a strange heaviness in the air. Perhaps it was just the dust stirred up by the old equipment, but I found myself double-checking that my apartment door was locked before going to bed. The next morning, I noticed something impossible. My apartment had always had 2 doors, the main entrance and the bathroom. But now there was a 3rd door on the wall opposite my bedroom, a plain wooden door with an old-fashioned brass knob and keyhole. It hadn't been there the night before. I approached it cautiously, trying the handle. Locked. The keyhole appeared to be very old, not matching any keys I owned. I pressed my ear against it, but heard nothing from the other side. This was impossible. I lived in an apartment building. This door was on an exterior wall. It couldn't lead anywhere. I called my landlord, who insisted nothing had changed in the building structure. When I sent him a photo of the door, he responded with confusion, asking why I'd installed a new door without permission. That evening, driven by a curiosity I couldn't explain, I loaded the second film reel. This footage was different. It showed a young couple in what appeared to be the 1960s, based on their clothing and the furnishings of the apartment they inhabited. Like the family in the first film, they never acknowledged the camera. The footage followed them through mundane activities, cooking dinner, reading newspapers, getting ready for bed. What disturbed me was the perspective. The camera seemed to be filming from inside closets, from dark corners, from outside windows looking in. These people were being watched without their knowledge. The film ended with a lingering shot of the couple sleeping. Then, just before the reel ran out, something moved in the darkest corner of their bedroom. A shadowy figure, only visible for a few frames. I rewound and paused, trying to get a clear look, but the figure remained indistinct, a darkness deeper than the surrounding shadows. That night, I dreamed of doors, endless doors in impossible places. When I woke the next morning, my apartment had a 4th door, this one in the kitchen wall where my refrigerator had been. The refrigerator now stood 3 feet to the left, as if it had always been there. This new door matched the first. Old wood, brass fittings, securely locked. I tried calling friends to come verify what was happening, but each time I tried to explain, the words wouldn't come out right. I'd find myself talking about other things, unable to mention the doors or the films. That night, I watched the third reel. A young man in what appeared to be the 1970s living alone in a studio apartment. The filming style was the same: voyeuristic, patient, predatory. And again, in the final frames, that shadowy figure, now slightly closer to the subject, slightly more distinct. I began to notice other changes in my apartment. The ceiling seemed higher, the hallway to my bedroom longer. Spaces that shouldn't exist were somehow being added, making room for more doors. By the sixth night, I had watched 6 reels and my apartment had 6 new doors, all locked, all leading to places that couldn't possibly exist in the building's architecture. I was afraid to watch the final reel, but more afraid not to. The 7th film was different. It showed my apartment, my furniture, my vintage collection, and me going about my daily routine. The footage had the same quality as the others, grainy, black and white, silent, but these were recent scenes. Me reading on the couch, me cooking dinner, me sleeping. I watched myself on the wall, filmed by a camera that didn't exist, operated by someone who had been in my apartment without my knowledge. Then came the final scene, me sitting exactly as I was now, watching the projector. The perspective was from the corner behind me. Slowly the view began to move closer. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. On the screen, the shadow figure began to emerge from the corner of my apartment, the same corner in which the projector was now casting this very image. With trembling hands, I reached for the light switch but stopped when I noticed something about the doors that had appeared in my apartment. All 7 were now standing open, revealing only darkness beyond. The film ran out, the tail end flapping against the projector with a rhythmic slapping sound. In the sudden darkness, I felt something cold brush against the back of my neck. I scrambled to turn on the lights. When the room brightened, the doors were gone. My apartment was back to normal. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by the certainty that I had imagined the whole thing, a vivid hallucination brought on by stress and an overactive imagination. Until I noticed the projector. It was gone. In its place sat a film camera, the same vintage as the projector, a Bell & Howell from the 1940s. Beside it lay a sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten note and a key. The collection must continue. 7 doors, 7 films, 7 days. Find the subjects, make the recordings, or the doors will return, this time with something waiting behind them. P.S. The key opens the first door when it reappears. What you'll find there will help you understand your task. That was 3 weeks ago. I've made 2 films so far. The camera works perfectly. It feels natural in my hands, as if I've been using it for years. I've found myself standing in shadows, filming people who never notice me.